I like to subscribe to all that. You know what time it is? It's Netflix time. This movie's called The Starling. It's an hour 44 minutes long. Spoiler alert. Let's just get it. So we start off with this couple named Lily and Jack, and they're painting a room for the baby. The baby's named Katie, by the way. Then we go from that to a year later. Katie's going to work. She works at this grocery store and sometimes seems literally depressed. She has somebody that keeps straightening up this hostess snowball aisle. Then she meets a shopper that keeps asking her in the aisle if she okay. She says she can have her and her pastor husband talk to her about some things. So we're thinking to ourselves, something must have happened to Lily within this time. Then her boss is talking to her, making sure she's good. Then he gives her some type of football analogy. And he tells her people have been noticing that she's been acting kind of funny. And he says that she's been distracted with this thing that's going on. So I'm like, what thing? Then you got this chick at the cashier is taking what's called a bubblegum selfie. Is that what it's come to now? That's what's hot in the streets? That's what's really hood, huh? Well, anyway, at the work, she stops at this hospital called New Horizons. And apparently she's there to give Jack a bag lunch. But I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is Jack doing there? So she meets up with Jack. They get together with the counselor and they have these group therapy meetings. And they can't really talk about their feelings of what's going on. So once again, we're thinking to ourselves, what the heck is going on? Then we got this one lady named Sheila. She's mad at her son because he's dating this female right here. And she can't deal with the fact that this girl keeps calling her mother every now and then. I'm not really sure exactly what the situation is with this. I'll leave it to your own analogies to figure out when you watch the movie. So after they don't really make a whole lot of progress, the counselor later on talks to Lily about the car. And she asks her, has she done anything with Katie's things? So now I'm thinking to myself, what the heck happened to Katie? So we find out Jack admitted himself into the hospital, and she gives Lily a card to speak to his therapist, a therapist that she recommends, a guy by the name of Larry Fine. So she goes back to her house, starts cutting the grass because the lawn looks terrible, and she stumbles upon this stick where she forgot she used to plant gardens. So I guess that gives her some inspiration to plant again. Then all of a sudden this bird flies around and attacks her. So as she gets stitched up, Jack is having one-on-one therapy sessions. The only thing Jack mentions here is how he feels bad about Lily having to come every day or every Tuesday. He's just basically there to deal with some grief. But we're like, what grief? But then as we go back to Lily, she starts walking around the house. We walk in the room and see an empty baby carriage. So we're thinking, alright, something definitely happened to Katie, but what? Then she gets rid of it and puts it outside. Before you know it, she gets rid of a lot of furniture and puts it outside. Then we had this flashback to when she was pregnant and they was looking at fireworks. So then she wakes back up and this guy wants to buy the baby carriage. But then she wants to know if he has any plans for that recliner that he has in the back of his truck. So she basically gives away all that stuff just for the recliner. Then you see how empty the room really is. It's like, damn, how much furniture did she get rid of? Pretty much all of it. Then she goes to Katie's room and starts wiping all the indents that the carriage left on the floor. And basically just lays there, looking at a montage of paper birds that she made over the years. Then she starts having visions about Jack being there with her. So then she actually goes to this clinic to talk to the dude Larry Fine. Turns out he used to be a therapist, but now he's a veterinarian. So she's thinking to herself, why the hell would she recommend a veterinarian to me? Nevertheless, they end up talking. She starts opening up and we find out what really happened to Katie. See, last year Katie died from a symptom called SIDS. It's like an unexplained baby disease. And Larry really wants to help her, but then he explains to himself, he's like, look, I'm not really a therapist no more. I'm a veterinarian now. And he's like, he can't really get that deep into the topic. But he still tells her, you can see me anytime you need me. Back at the hospital, they're doing arts and crafts. And for some reason, I don't know why, he looks like Xavier Woods to me. A wrestler in WWE, if you didn't know, by the way. But anyway. So we find out Jack's profession, he was actually a school teacher. And because of Katie dying, he doesn't feel like he could be around kids. So that's one of the reasons why he's in this hospital in the first place. Meanwhile, Lily's out to redo her garden and start fresh. And then the bird tries to attack her again, which it eventually did, and brought her back to Larry. She says she's going to try to find an actual doctor, but then they start talking about the bird because they don't know what kind of bird it is. Yeah, the conversation didn't really get that deep. So then she goes to this plant shop. Then she talks to this lady about finding something to scare away birds. So she ends up giving her a plastic owl. So while she's in the house, she gets a phone call from Jack, but he doesn't do any talking. She starts explaining her day, but then after a certain amount of time, Jack just hangs up the phone. She knew it was him automatically, and apparently he's been doing this for a while. Now when he's in his hospital, he's supposed to be taking his medicine every day. But come to find out when the nurse leaves, he digs in his shoe. We find out he hasn't been taking none of that stuff. He's just been hiding it in his sock. Lily has another meeting with Larry again, and they're still trying to figure out what kind of bird it is that's in her yard. Then Lily gets a visit was to walk around with Jack outside the facility. Lily tells Jack that she got a new recliner and she just was like, she just felt like she needed to change. Later on back in the garden, we see that the bird is not scared of this owl, and to further implement that, it ends up taking a shit on it. Then Larry actually comes by the house and tells her this actually a type of starling. Then he tells this story about Mozart, the composer, actually had that same type of bird. It says he actually gave the bird a funeral, but he never even went to his dad's funeral. Then she goes to the store and talks to this guy that knows about capturing birds, or animals for that matter. And she ends up getting some poison to mix with bird seed in a bird feeder. She sets it up at the house and gets ready for work. Later on, she's talking to one of her employees and she starts feeling bad about the bird feeder. When she goes back home, she sees that a raven got into it and died. She feels so bad about it, she gives the bird a proper funeral or burial, takes the bird feeder down and throws it in the trash. And you can barely see it, but the starling is sitting there watching in the tree the entire time. So then we see Jack having another therapy session, and this time he's talking about how he can't return to his normal life. He gets deep, but he doesn't really get that deep. So Lily's prepared this time. She got a football helmet. Then she starts opening up more of her feelings to the bird than anybody else. How she's been trying to hold it together for everybody. How she thinks about Katie every day. She's been telling most of the people that she's been fine, but this is the first time she starts opening up a little more, and to all things is a bird. And as the rain's coming down, she's starting to play some music. And when she goes to sit down, she finds a baby sock in the seat. Yeah, man, that's pretty sad. Then she decides to go walking in the rain and head over to Larry's house. Now, I'm not sure exactly how she found out where his address was. Larry tries to give her some encouragement, but this is when he reassures her that he is not a therapist anymore. But he tells her she can stay there for the night since it's raining. But then we find out the real reason why Jack is in the hospital. We found out one night Jack went inside of his car outside of the garage, turned on the car and let the exhaust fumes get to him, so he almost tried to kill himself. Next day, they go for their little walk again. Then she tells him that she got rid of all of Katie's stuff, doing their best to try to move on and move forward. But Jack can't handle it, and he goes back inside the hospital. Talk about at this point, he just needs some space. During the ride back home in the rain, Lily almost crashed into a car. After the things that Jack told her, her mind state is completely gone at this point. She's not even really focusing on her work. Then she goes back up to the hospital. Then the counselor tells him at this point that Jack doesn't even want to have any visitors. She's like, I drive an hour back and forth just to see him. But considering the hospital's policy, it is his right not to have any visitors. So after she goes back to her car, she gets all her frustrations out yelling at Jack, if he can even hear her, which Jack was paying attention looking through the window. Then we got this guy here crying about his cat. He's like, dude, you gotta feed him strictly cat food. Apparently this dude was feeding her like Cheetos, nachos, all type of shit. I'm like, dude, really? Then he talks to this little boy and he says his mom's not really doing so well. She can't handle this type of stuff. That's why he's here with the cat. And I don't know if it gets to Larry or not, but then all of a sudden Lily shows up and she needs a favor. And he has to reiterate he's not a therapist anymore and he can't help her trying to be able to see Jack. And he basically explains to her he's a veterinarian now. There's nothing he can really do. So she goes back home, gets frustrated. She starts tearing up her garden because she sees certain parts of it are dying. Then she goes up the ladder and tries to attack the bird again. Then when she gets to the top, she finds out the Starling has a nest of babies. Then the Starling comes back and ends up knocking her off the ladder. So now she relaxes in the chair with all these frozen peas and stuff on her trying to heal herself. Then we get to the scene that kids are playing. So he goes over to play with them, brings a couple of adults over. But you can tell by the look on her face the girl's feeling uncomfortable. Then the guys start dragging him away. Then he pushes one of the doctors on the ground and they force him to go inside. All he wanted to do was just play with the kids, but once again people felt like they were getting scared of him for some reason. Mostly because he's unstable at this point. And then we have Lily messing up at her job because she's putting a price tag for 5 cents on everything. Clearly she's not focusing and they tell her to take the day off. She goes back to her garden and starts destroying stuff. Then she sees that one eggplant is actually growing. Then Larry actually goes out of his way and get a one-on-one talk with Jack. And Jack doesn't even think the therapy's for him. He thinks the therapy's for Larry because of his aspirations of actually failing to become an actual therapist. Then as Lily and one of her employees is sharing a beer, chilling out in the garden, the Starling comes back again. And this time she actually hit him with a rock, but then she feels bad. But then they take the Starling to Larry, and Larry's never actually worked on a bird before. So then we see Jack in his room counting up all these pills, and we find out the bags that Lily was giving him all the time were these Hostess snowballs. So that was her obsession of trying to fix the rack. And more so, this is one of Jack's favorite snacks when he was a kid. Not much of a lunch, but I get the sentiment. Then he starts looking at all these pills he collected. And we're thinking to ourselves, what the fuck is he going to do with those pills? He hasn't been taking them. If he takes them all at one time, that could definitely be bad. So you're thinking to yourself, what is going through his mind, his head state right now? But instead, he decides to go to a group meeting. And he opens up about his feelings, about Katie, about Lily. He says he's had this feeling of depression for over like 20 years. He just wants that feeling to stop. And that feeling opened back up the moment Katie died. And he feels responsible for not taking Katie to the hospital sooner because he had overslept while she was crying. And he pretty much blames himself for Katie's death. And, he was basically ready to quit on life. But the thing about Lily is he knows that she never quits on anything. And he wants to finally be there for her throughout this crazy time. Meanwhile, Lily and Larry are making sure the bird's okay. The bird's supposed to get a couple drops each day of some type of medicine. And he tells her maybe it should be able to fly. Maybe. And that's what she does, watches over the bird. Then she gets a call from Jack and she finally gets all her frustrations out. And after that, she hangs up on him. Now he's back to doing arts and crafts. And it's supposed to be making light switches and he makes this tree. But he doesn't have a hole for the switch. Then he gives this kind of metaphor, does it have to be a hole in it for the work? Like, trust me, you just had to hear for yourself. I messed up the metaphor. Then he talks to his doctor one last time, and he feels like he's ready to leave the hospital now. Eventually, the Starling gets better, and Lily sets her free to be with the family. She gets to visit Jack again, and they clear up a lot of things, and they look towards the future. And now Jack is back home. They put their helmets on so they could deal with the garden and deal with the Starling. And there you go. So it's a very profound movie. I really didn't do it a whole lot of justice. I want you to just go ahead and watch it yourself. The Starling on Netflix. Check it out. Like, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. Sleep easy on the easy business. Big. You got that slow.